Okay, awesome. So let's go ahead and let's jump in and get started. So what I wanted to talk about real quick is I wanted to talk about how we're going to go about solving some challenges. These challenges are going to get more difficult now that we're at this stage of the class. And I just want to take a moment and not take for granted that you definitely know how to do this. And so, first, I want to talk about the reason why we would even care about this. So, as a lot of you probably know, um, when you're going out there into the working world, et cetera, you're going to get asked a lot of questions, right? And most of the time, these questions are going to be challenges that you're going to have to solve. And essentially, what a coding challenge is just a way for you to prove your proficiency inside of some programming language. And it forces you to have to solve a problem using the skills that you've learned, right? So a lot of the time you have to do this. If you're in person, you might have to solve a coding challenge on a whiteboard where you're writing out your thought process as you go. If you're doing it on Zoom, you might have to do that via screen share, or if you're working with Google, sometimes they do it like in a Google Doc or something along those lines. And other times you'll get actually sent a prompt in the mail, in electronic mail and email, that'll basically just map out like some type of problem that you have to solve, right? And normally that's called a take-home challenge, and you're able to do that as well. So what we want to talk about real quick is a quick four-step process about how you solve coding challenges, specifically in the way that you try to solve it when you're in an interview. I've had numerous interviews. I've gotten a chance to interview numerous people as well. I've been a hiring manager, et cetera, all that good stuff. All of it's not all of that just to say that I have a little bit of experience with it with both sides. So I want to kind of like give that information to you as well as somebody going out there into the job market. So we'll start as and you'll see that I'm on the coding challenges page, the same place where you should be at. And we're going to come across the first coding challenge. And what you'll notice about it is that you probably see an HTML page there. That is correct. That's what you should see. And at the bottom, you'll see a body tag. And in that body tag, you'll see both a script.js file and a specs.js file. The reason why I'm showing this to you is to let you know that the reason why you're seeing this HTML and why you're not just immediately seeing the REPL is because this is where we mount everything so that you can actually run tests inside of your code. So if you just click on that file button on the left-hand side and you click it, all of your files will open up. And we don't care about styles, specs, or script, but of course you can look at any of the files you want. We'll click on scripts.js, and that is going to be where our challenge is at. And what we're going to do real quick in here is I'm going to go ahead and start to write out my 4 steps to how you would go about solving a coding challenge. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a quick space up here above the prompt. Let me go ahead and log myself in. Why is it giving me this problem here? Interesting. Let me just open it over here, and that's fine. And I will go ahead and I'll fork it. And I'll go ahead and fix that button problem probably for you before you actually have to use it. And I'll just go over here to script.js. And now that I'm in here, I'll go ahead and I'll go down to right below difficulty basic. And in here, I'm going to go ahead and write my 4 steps to solving a coding challenge. Right? And in here, the first step, the very first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to clarify the challenge, right? You want to be very, very clear about what the question is asking, and you don't want to start skipping ahead and just write it. You want to make sure you carefully read the prompt. Like, for example, this prompt says, write a function called SumNumbers that accepts a single array of numbers and returns the sum of numbers in the array. If the array is empty, return 0. right? Perfect. So that's the prompt. And by me trying to clarify the challenge, what I'm going to notice is that I have to create a function. The name of that function is going to be some numbers. So I need to name my function some numbers. It accepts a single array. So it accepts one parameter, right? That's an array of numbers, which means it's telling me that I'm going to accept an array of numbers. Now, what some people try to do is they try to write fancy code that that's going to work with 550 different things. That's not something that you're looking to do when you create a coding challenge. What you're looking to do is to solve the problem the exact way they're asking you to solve the problem, right? So they're asking you to solve with the assumption that you're going to assume a single array of numbers, not not five arrays, not six arrays, not two arrays, not an array of strings, none of that. That you're guaranteed to receive an array of numbers, right? And then it says it's going to return the sum of the numbers in the array. Then the next thing it tells us immediately, it says if the array is empty, return 0. So if I have an empty array, I should return 0. So now I've clarified the challenge. The next thing is that we want to talk through the process. And this is essentially for you to do with your interview. You want to talk through the process of how you would solve it, right? And then the third thing we're going to do is you're going to use the space purposefully. So you want to use the space that you have available to you purposefully. You don't want to just be writing chicken scratch in different locations and stuff like that. You want to use the space available to you on purpose and purposefully. And then finally, the last thing is we're going to ask for feedback, right? So one thing that I've seen a lot of people have issues with, and I'm talking about people interviewing, is that they won't ask me what I think about what they're doing while they're doing. And you should be asking your interviewer how they feel about what you're doing, right? And depending on the interview, they'll give you different levels of information. But you should be asking for that. If you're working on your own, once you finish, you should also be checking for solutions. So you don't want to check for solutions to solve the problem. That defeats the purpose. And if that is your current method, I would very, very, very much so advise you to stop doing that. Do not look for the answer and Google the answer first. Even if you feel like you're stuck, write code first. Think through the entire problem. Try to solve it. Write out pseudocode. Whatever you have to do, exhaust your brain first, then check for the solutions. If you don't do it that way, or if you say, I don't have enough time to solve this problem, I only have 20 minutes, so I'm not even going to try, you will not push yourself to the next level. You will get no better, right? So you have to make sure that that's what you're doing. I know it's more uncomfortable, but just like when you're working out and you're trying to, get from 225 on your bench to 315, or if you're trying to, hit 100 free throws in a row, if you're playing basketball or whatever difficult task you might be trying to do, going through the process of getting good enough to do that is difficult. It is hard. There's going to be a whole bunch of times you fall. If you've ever skateboarded, when you're first learning to ollie or you're first learning to kickflip, you're going to fall and fall and fall and fall and fall. And this is not going to be any different. But if you never make those falls, you will never learn how to do the activity that we're talking about. So you have to go through the process, even if you don't like puzzles, whatever. You have to go through that trouble to get better at it. And I had to do the same thing. And any successful engineers is going through the same thing in order to get where they are. So it's very, very important to be able to do that. So we're going to ask for feedback and then check for solutions. And like I said, if you're being evaluated, ask the evaluator for feedback as you're coding. Ask them if there's any edge cases you should be worried about. You can ask them to clarify. For example, in this, I wouldn't ask them that question about the parameters because it's very clear that you're going to accept a single array of numbers. If it's not clear to you, though, and you don't see that from the problem, ask a question about it. Make sure you're clear. Never start coding unless you're clear. Until you've clarified what you're trying to do, you cannot solve the problem effectively. So with that said, it says we need to sum numbers. And here are some examples of like some output. If I put in 10, boom, I get 10. If I put 5 and 10, I get 15. Put in 2 and 10, I get -5. I put in an empty array, I get 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a function. I'm going to call it sum numbers, and I'm going to go ahead and set that equal to a function that accepts a single array. I'm going to just call it nums. Why not? And I'm going to go ahead and say that because it gives me the fact that if it's an empty array, return 0, I have no reason to even try to calculate that. So it's like if nums dot length, and I'll say if not nums dot length, because basically 0 is falsy. So if nums dot length is falsy, right? So if this if this is true, because nums.length being 0 would give you false, you nod it, it gives you true. So if this is true, that statement's true, we'll go ahead and we'll just say we'll return 0, because there's no reason to do any math. So we would just be wasting time. And because I returned in here, I don't have to do an else or anything like that. I'll just go ahead and go down to the next line. And in here, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll simply say in here, what we're going to do is I'm going to use the reduce method. So I'll go ahead and say nums.reduce, right? And the reason why I'm using reduce is because this is literally one of the easiest cases to be able to use reduce. And map filter and reduce are always your best friends when you're on a coding challenge, because they make your code look more sophisticated. And they prove you have a handle of the language, because because what they're trying to always see a lot of the time when you do a challenge in a specific language is that they're trying to know that you know how to be productive in the language. And by saying nums.reduce or nums.filter or nums.map, it shows immediately that I know the methods that exist on the array object, right? As opposed to I could, have learned JavaScript yesterday and be able to make a for loop, but I need to understand a little bit more about JavaScript to know how to use one of the array methods on it and know what parameters it should accept, etc. So, and if I do that without looking it up, that shows that I know this language. So I'm going to go ahead and say nums.reduce. I'm going to go ahead and say that I'm going to have the accumulator. I'll have the number itself, and I have the index, right? So I'll leave my little callback. And essentially what I'm going to do is in here, let me go ahead and start it from 0. And I'll just say return accumulator plus num, right? And then because I know about how the language works, I'll use one of the language features that I know that whenever I do reduce, it's going to return to me a value. Return to me a value. So since I know it's going to return me a value, I can return that value because this is what's going to give me my answer. I don't have to do it on multiple lines. So I'll go ahead and I'll save that. I will save it. Right. And if I want to go ahead and I want to, see something about it or whatever, I'll go ahead and I will run it. Right. And let's see, sums array of 1 num, 2 nums, 3 nums, sums empty array, 4 specs, finished, and there's no failures. The other thing that I can do, if I want to just check something real quick, I can go ahead and I can console.log, and I'll throw in, let's say, for example, this right here. Let's go ahead and do that. Run it. You see that I get 7, which is what I should get. At the end of the day, the fact that I see that I have 4 specs and 0 failures, that means that I solve this challenge effectively. As opposed to if I go ahead and I put return here, I take the return off and then say run, it says I get all this red because I have 4 specs, I have 3 failures, so I failed 3 of the challenges, right? But once I put the return back, and the reason why I'm failing because I'm not returning any value. If I go ahead and I return it again, and then run it, I can see that I'm passing. If you want to see the specs that we're using, you can always go over here and you can see that these are the tests that are being ran. So so if do I expect when I run some numbers and it's only an array with the number 10 in it, I should get the value 10. Also, I expect that when I have when I sum numbers and there's an array of 5 and 10, the value should be 15. And then when I do this one, it should be 7. And when I do this one, it should be 0. And I can add some additional ones if I want. So if I want to go ahead and I want to go ahead and add an additional spec, I can do it this way. I'll go ahead and fix my indents. And I'll go ahead and say, instead of sum empty array, I'll say sum Arthur is the goat. Then I'll go ahead and say, I'll sum 12, 99. Actually, we'll serve 24, 8, 23, 6, 45. That's 32, 55, 61, 106, I think. And we'll say we expect that to be 106, 32, 55, 61, 106. Yep. Let's go ahead and run it now. And now I have 5 specs. The one at the bottom says sums Arthur is the goat. I have 0 failures still. And if I click on it, I can just see that what happened with that one, right? So with that said, like I said, we can see that this problem is effectively solved, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll go ahead and stop the recording, and I'll leave it to you all to solve these next challenges.